You cannot play without a level of competition that allows for you to have a chance.
Nobody decided
It wasn't Pistons basketball by any stretch of the imagination. That's what this is.
Gallinari shortens up the shot, sends it and scores it.
You knew it was going in, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Detroit Pistons are amid a historic losing streak, and as of recording, they've fallen all the way to 2-15, with head coach Monty Williams ripping the team, calling them immature and undisciplined. And coming off a blowout loss at home to the Wizards, I have to ask, is this Pistons team the worst we've ever seen? Let's find out. Now, this Pistons team came into the season with low expectations, but generally, there was some excitement around the prospect of Detroit taking a jump into a potential play-in spot, or at least showing a little bit of life this year. The Pistons started the 2023 season with a 2-1 record, losing to the Heat by 1 on opening night, but then beating up Charlotte and Chicago on back-to-back nights to open up the season pretty strong. At the very start of the season, the news around the league was actually about how impressive this Pistons team was. Cade Cunningham was finally healthy after missing the bulk of last season and looked like his #1 overall self. And young guys like Jalen Duren and Asor Thompson both were putting up dominant performances on the glass that led to wins for Detroit. They looked good. But since that October 28th win against Chicago, we've yet to see the Pistons win another game. It's been a while. There's a lot of fingers to be pointed around in Detroit. I know Pistons fans are not usually on the side of general manager Troy Weaver, and he's promised to build a better team year after year, and to be honest, we've yet to see it. I also know there was some pushback on signing Monty Williams to a huge incentive-based contract that would cost the team $100 million potentially. But for this video, I do want to focus on what the Pistons have on the court currently, and to be fair, it's nothing to get excited about. Currently, the Pistons are bottom 5 in points per game, 3-point percentage, offensive rating, net rating, assist-to-turnover ratio, and I'm sure a million other advanced stats that I don't really understand. With Monty Williams at the helm, I wouldn't necessarily say this team is poorly coached. As we know, Monty is a fairly defensive-oriented coach, and despite the Pistons not being anywhere near the top of the defensive rankings, they're notably better on that end than their offensive side. So I trust Monty just a little bit. And we saw Monty Williams in Phoenix. When it comes to player development, I actually think Monty is the perfect guy to bring into Detroit. When I look back and see how he helped form a guy like Mikal Bridges into an all-star level talent, I just can't help but look at Asar Thompson and see a similar thing happening. Now, don't get me wrong, Asar will probably never be the shooter Mikal is, I get that, but he adds that rebounding help and plays an elite level of defense that still makes me want to draw the comparison. With that being said, we can't pretend like this Pistons team looks good at really any facet of the game. I hate to speculate, because you never really know the dynamics of a team unless you're around them, I get that. But with comments that Monty Williams has made and internal talks from some of their best players, it kind of seems obvious that this team isn't bought into an identity, and I will go out on a limb and say they don't even have an identity. In the same day of press conferences I alluded to earlier, where Monty Williams called the team immature, and he was candidly upset about the team's performance. I mean, I would be too. They're 2-15. Guys like Isaiah Livers and Cade Cunningham echoed his statements. They said similar things, and in my opinion, that's probably the biggest problem of the whole team. When I look at some of the other worst teams in the league, they at least still have go-to guys to rally around when things get bad. They don't have to be all-stars, but they're veterans, and they know enough and have enough respect to be listened to when things go wrong in a locker room. Like, the Bulls have DeRozan. The Grizzlies have a bunch of vets, Marcus Smart, Steven Adams. Utah even has a guy like Jordan Clarkson if you're not looking at Lauri Markkanen to speak. You guys get what I'm saying. My biggest question with Detroit is, how do you dig yourself out of a hole that you've put yourself in? I mean, you're 2-15, again, you're very bad. And your vocal leaders are guys like Cade Cunningham. I like Cade Cunningham, I think he's going to be a star one day, but he's barely played 100 NBA games. He cannot be the voice of your locker room yet. Or a guy like Isaiah Livers, who I just mentioned. He rarely even plays to begin with. I respect that he has a role outside of just playing, but I still really wouldn't look at that sort of guy when I want to get riled up. And with all due respect to Alec Burks and Joe Harris, it's important to point out, they're really the two only vets on this team, and a guy like Alec Burks is actually having a sneaky good season. But to be honest, they just don't have enough of a pull to turn this Pistons team around. There's a reason that things are going bad right now, and we're not hearing from either of them. And again, I've talked a lot about Monty Williams, but he's really the shining part of this team. And even though I think he's a good mentor, even though I truly think he is a good coach, you need guys that actually play, guys that are in the locker room, guys that have some sort of voice to get a team fired up when you're playing so bad. Monty can't do it on his own, and even though it seems like he's trying, the guys aren't really seeming to listen. This team has fallen down a pretty high cliff, and in all honesty, I don't know if they even have the talent to climb back up, but I'm not going to clickbait you guys any longer. Is this 2023 Pistons team really the worst team the NBA has ever seen? I'll say, not yet. And I know that's a bit of a cop-out, guys, but hear me out. In my opinion, the worst team ever is that 2012 Charlotte Bobcats team who went 7-59 in that shortened season. They were really, really bad. The team's leading scorer was a 24-year-old Gerald Henderson, who was still only putting up 15 a game. They were at the very bottom of almost every NBA efficiency category, and honestly, most categories in general. They were horrible. And I understand the Pistons look pretty miserable, but really not as bad as this Bobcats team I was just talking about. I mean, the Pistons at least have Cade Cunningham, who looks like he can live up to that #1 overall pick potential. This video didn't come out on the channel yet, guys, but I do have a video ready to go talking about how great I think Cade Cunningham will be. I do think he's that guy. And I do want to go back to guys I mentioned earlier, like Jalen Duren and Sor Thompson. I mean, they are guys on the team with pretty high ceilings that I think will execute and become great NBA players. And when you look at a Bobcats team that had guys like Derek Brown and Boris Diaw in those spots, there's no denying that Thompson and Duren are much better players. I also think it's important to mention, with the improved scoring and faster pace of the modern NBA, as well as overall improvements in coaching schemes, we probably won't ever see a team truly as bad as those early 2010s Bobcats. They were horrible. So for now, I will say the Pistons are not the worst team in NBA history, but if we're being honest, they're on the right pace. Pistons fans, if you stuck with me for this whole video, you guys are really troopers. So I want to talk about what the future of this team looks like. I don't think they're going to be bad forever, even though it looks glim right now. Even though these guys aren't necessarily playing at the highest level like you would hope they would, there's still a lot of talent on this roster. I think guys like Cunningham, Thompson, and Duren are guys that you build around for the long haul. I don't think there's any argument there. And guys like Bagley, guys like Wiseman, guys like Killian Hayes, even guys like Alec Burks who are a little bit older, and maybe even a guy like Joe Harris if a contender wants him, are all possible trade assets that could bring you back a return better than the one that you have now. Even some guys that we didn't expect to make the Pistons roster this year are coming in and getting important minutes. Is that because you're down by a bunch of points late in the game? Probably, but it's still important when your team doesn't have a whole lot of talent in the first place. A lot of people are talking about Kevin Knox, and Kevin Knox has had a strange career after being an early lottery pick and bouncing around. He's played on the Pistons before, and he looks really good right now. So maybe he's actually someone that is a capable starter going forward. He doesn't have to be, and you have a low investment in him, but there's a lot of potential there as well, so I think you can be happy about that. And although a lot of fan bases wouldn't call firing their GM a step in the right direction, I think that's what it's going to be this offseason for the Pistons. Troy Weaver hasn't converted on anything he said he would do for the Pistons. He's talked about bringing in big players, he's talked about making trades, and then when it gets to free agency time, he says that there's not anyone there that's worth your time. And I don't think that's fair to the fans because, believe it or not, Detroit Pistons fans are still some of the best in basketball. I mean, these guys show up in Detroit for this team that's not showing them any promise, and they still come out and are some of the most electric fans in the entire sport. So you guys deserve better. There's a reason I'm talking about this, because I do think things need to change for Detroit. Another option and another route that I hear people talking about is the trade deadline this season. A guy like Zach LaVine has been rumored to Detroit quite a bit, honestly, because it's time to unload some of those assets that you have already, and the Bulls are amidst a rebuild themselves. Maybe they can develop the guys better than you can, and if you get Zach LaVine, at least you're giving hope to the fans. At least you're selling seats. It reminds me a lot of when they got Blake Griffin. He wasn't going to lead them to the finals or anything, but it was going to make your team capable to at least try to make a playoff run. If you get a guy like Zach LaVine next to Cunningham, Thompson, Duren, and whoever you decide to throw into that shooting guard spot, you won't necessarily be a contender, but you won't be a bottom feeder anymore, so I'd have respect if you went that direction as well. There's a lot of routes you can go, Pistons fans. It only goes up from here. Will your ownership and GM make those decisions to improve your team? I really hope so, because I don't want you guys to become the Oakland A's of basketball. That is the worst possible situation, and I don't think the Pistons deserve that after having such a rich history and being one of the best franchises in the entire sport for a very long time. Alright, I won't make you guys think about the Pistons any longer, but with that being said, what do you guys think Detroit should do to get out of this historic slump? Do they trade for a star? Do they keep tanking? Let me know in the comments and leave a like if you enjoyed. This was Next Man Up. We'll see you in the next one.